Halakha is the collective body of Jewish religious laws derived from the written and oral Torah. It includes the 613 mitzvot, subsequent Talmudic and rabbinic law, and the customs and traditions compiled in the Shulchan Aruch. Judaism classically draws no distinction in its laws between religious and non-religious life. Jewish religious tradition does not distinguish clearly between religious, national, racial, or ethnic identities. Halakha guides not only religious practices and beliefs, but numerous aspects of day-to-day life. Halakha is often translated as Jewish law, although a more literal translation might be the way to behave or the way of walking. The word derives from the root that means to behave. Historically, in the diaspora, halakha served many Jewish communities as an enforceable avenue of law, both civil and religious. Since there is no differentiation in classical Judaism, since the Age of Enlightenment, Emancipation, and Haskalah, many have come to view the halakha as less binding in day-to-day life, as it relies on rabbinic interpretation, as opposed to the pure, written words recorded in the Jewish Bible. Under contemporary Israeli law, however, certain areas of Israeli family and personal status law are under the authority of the rabbinic courts and therefore treated according to halakha. Some differences in halakha itself are found among Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi, Yemenite, and other Jews who historically lived in isolated communities, such as in Ethiopia, reflecting the historic and geographic diversity of various Jewish communities within the diaspora. Etymology and terminology. The word halakha is derived from the Hebrew root halak, to walk, or to go. Taken literally, therefore, halakha translates as the way to walk, rather than law. The words halakha refers to the corpus of rabbinic legal texts, or to the overall system of religious law. The term may also be related to Akkadian ilkuz, a property tax, rendered in Aramaic as halak, designating one or several obligations. Halakha is often contrasted with agada, the diverse corpus of rabbinic exegetical, narrative, philosophical, mystical and other non-legal texts. At the same time, since writers of halakha may draw upon the Aggadic and even mystical literature, there is a dynamic interchange between the genres. Halakha also does not include the parts of the Torah not related to commandments. Halakha constitutes the practical application of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, as developed through discussion and debate in the classical rabbinic literature, especially the Mishnah and the Talmud, and is codified in the Mishnah Torah as Shulchan Aruch. Because halakha is developed and applied by various halakhic authorities rather than one sole official voice, different individuals and communities may well have different answers to halakhic questions. With few exceptions, controversies are not settled through authoritative structures because during the Jewish diaspora Jews lacked a single judicial hierarchy or appellate review process for halakha. Halakha has been developed throughout the generations since before 500 BCE. In a constantly expanding collection of rabbinic literature are initially consolidated in the Talmud. First and foremost, it forms a body of intricate judicial opinions, legislation, customs, and recommendations, many of them passed down over the centuries, and an assortment of ingrained behaviors, relayed to successive generations from the moment a child begins to speak. It is also the subject of intense study in yeshivas. The 613 mitzvot. Broadly, the halakha comprises the practical application of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, as developed in subsequent rabbinic literature. According to the Talmud, there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah, 248 positive mitzvot and 365 negative mitzvot, supplemented by 7 mitzvot legislated by the rabbis of antiquity. Categories. Classical rabbinic Judaism has two basic categories of laws. Laws which are believed to have been revealed by God to the Israelites at Mount Sinai, e.g., the written Torah, also called the Law of Moses, and also elucidations therefrom, known as the Oral Torah. Laws of human origin including rabbinic decrees, interpretations, customs, etc. This division between revealed and rabbinic commandments may influence the importance of a rule, its enforcement and the nature of its ongoing interpretation. Halakhic authorities may disagree on which laws fall into which categories of the circumstances under which prior rabbinic rulings can be re-examined by contemporary rabbis. But all Halakhic Jews hold that both categories exist and that the first category is immutable, with exceptions only for life-saving and similar emergency circumstances. A second classical distinction is between the written law, laws written in the Hebrew Bible, and the oral law, laws which are believed to have been transmitted orally prior to the later compilation in texts such as the Mishnah, Talmud, and rabbinic codes. Commandments are divided into positive and negative commands, which are treated differently in terms of divine and human punishment. Positive commandments require an action to be performed and are considered to bring the performer closer to God. Negative commandments forbid specific action, and violations create a distance from God. A further division is made between Chukim, Mishpatim, and Eduyot. Through the ages, various rabbinical authorities have classified some of the 613 commandments in various other ways. A different approach divides the laws into a different set of categories: laws in relation to God and laws about relations with other people. Within Talmudic literature, Jewish law is divided into the 6 orders of the Mishnah, which are categories by proximate subject matter: Zeraim for agricultural laws and prayer, Mode for the Sabbath and the festivals, Nashim dealing primarily with marriage and divorce, Nezikin for civil and criminal law, Kodashim for sacrifices and the dietary laws, and Tohoro for ritual purity. However, Talmudic texts often deal with laws outside these apparent subject categories. As a result, Jewish law came to be categorized in other ways in the post-Talmudic period. In the major codes of Jewish law, 2 other main categorization schemes are found. Maimonides' Mishnah Torah divides the laws into 14 sections. The codification efforts that culminated in the Shulchan Aruch divide the law into 4 sections, including only laws that do not depend on being physically present in the land of Israel. Sin Judaism regards the violation of the commandments, the mitzvot, to be a sin. The generic Hebrew word for any kind of sin is avera. Based on the Tanakh, Judaism describes 3 levels of sin: pasha, an intentional sin, an action committed in deliberate defiance of God's commandments; avon, a sin of lust or uncontrollable emotion, committed against one's will and is not in line with one's true inner desires. It is a sin done knowingly, but not done to defy God. Chet, an unintentional sin. Relatedly, the 3 terms, chayav, patur, mutar, in the Gemara and Halakhic codes classify the permissibility of an action of the severity of its prohibition and punishment. Chayav means the one who transgresses the prohibition is responsible for their own criminal actions, and therefore ought to pay the price for them. Patur means exempt of liability to punishment, however the action is forbidden. Mutar means the action is permitted. Judaism understands that the vast majority of people, aside from those who are termed tzaddikim and those termed tzaddikim gemurim, will succumb to sin in their lives. sin or a state of sin does not condemn a person to damnation. There is always a road of teshuvah. There are some classes of people for whom this is exceedingly difficult, such as those who commit adultery, as well as those who slander others. In earlier days, when ancient Jews had a functioning court system, courts were empowered to administer physical punishments for various violations, upon conviction by extremely high standards of evidence, far stricter than those required in Western courts today. These punishments included execution, corporal punishment, incarceration, and excommunication. However, since the fall of the Second Temple, executions have been forbidden. Since the fall of the autonomous Jewish communities of Europe, most other punishments also have been discontinued. Today, then, one's accounts are reckoned solely by God. The Talmud says that although courts capable of executing sinners no longer exist, the prescribed penalties continue to be applied by providence. For instance, someone who has committed a sin punishable by stoning might fall off a roof, or someone who ought to be executed by strangulation might drown. Gentiles in Jewish law, the 7 laws of Noah, also referred to as the Noahide laws or the Noachide laws, are a set of imperatives which, according to the Talmud, were given by God as a binding set of laws for the children of Noah, that is, all of humanity. Views today. Orthodox Judaism holds that Halakha is the divine law as laid out in the Torah. Rabbinical laws, rabbinical decrees and customs combine. The rabbis, who made many additions and interpretations of Jewish law, did so only in accordance with regulations they believe were given for this purpose to Moses on Mount Sinai. See Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 11. See Orthodox Judaism, beliefs about Jewish law and tradition. Conservative Judaism holds that Halakha is normative and binding, and is developed as a partnership between people and God based on Sinaitic Torah. While there are a wide variety of conservative views, a common belief is that Halakha is, and has always been, an evolving process subject to interpretation by rabbis in every time period. See Conservative Judaism, beliefs. Reform Judaism and Reconstructionist Judaism both hold that modern views of how the Torah and rabbinic law developed imply that the body of rabbinic Jewish law is no longer normative on Jews today. Those in the traditionalist wing of these movements believe that the Halakha represents a personal starting point, holding that each Jew is obligated to interpret the Torah, Talmud, and other Jewish works for themselves, and this interpretation will create separate commandments for each person. Those in the liberal and classical wings of Reform believe that in this day and era most Jewish religious rituals are no longer necessary, and many hold that following most Jewish laws is actually counterproductive. They propose that Judaism has entered a phase of ethical monotheism, and that the laws of Judaism are only remnants of an earlier stage of religious evolution, and need not be followed. This is considered wrong, and even heretical, by Orthodox and Conservative Judaism. Humanistic Jews value the Torah as a historical, political, and sociological text written by their ancestors. They do not believe that every word of the Torah is true, or even morally correct, just because the Torah is old. The Torah is both disagreed with and questioned. Humanistic Jews believe that the entire Jewish experience, and not only the Torah, should be studied as a source for Jewish behavior and ethical values. Flexibility. Despite its internal rigidity, Halakha has generally been a flexible system, addressing issues on the basis of circumstance and precedent. The classical approach has permitted new rulings regarding modern technology. These rulings guide the observant about the proper use of electricity on the Sabbath and holidays within the parameters of Halakha. Indeed, Many scholarly tomes have been published and are constantly being reviewed, ensuring the maximum coordination between electrical appliances and technology with the needs of the religiously observant Jew, with a great range of opinions, often, as to the applicability of the law in any given situation. The proviso is to consult your local rabbi opposing. Modern critics, however, have charged that with the rise of movements that challenge the divine authority of Halakha, traditional Jews have greater reluctance to change not only the laws themselves but also other customs and habits than traditional rabbinical Judaism did prior to the advent of reform in the 19th century. Differences between Orthodox and Conservative Judaism. Orthodox Jews maintain Halakha is derived from the divine law of the Torah. Rabbinical laws, rabbinical decrees and customs combine. As such, it should be adhered to as an unalterable authority. They also believe there are traditional formulas that date back to Moses on how the divine law may be interpreted. See above. Rules by which early Jewish law was derived. While conservative Jews have varied views regarding the origin of the Torah and its authority today, and believe it can be continuously reinterpreted, the view of Halakha has given rise to substantial differences in approach as well as result. Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Jews believe that Halakha is a religious system whose core represents the revealed will of God. Although Orthodox Judaism acknowledges that rabbis made many decisions and decrees regarding Jewish law where the written Torah itself is non-specific, they did so only in accordance with regulations given to them by Moses on Mount Sinai. These regulations were transmitted orally until shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple. They were then recorded in the Mishnah and explained in the Talmud and commentaries throughout history, including today. Orthodox Judaism believes that subsequent interpretations have been derived with the utmost accuracy and care. The most widely accepted codes of Jewish law are known as Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. No rabbi has the right to change Jewish law unless he clearly understands how it coincides with the precepts of the Talmud and later codes of Jewish law. Later commentaries were accepted by many rabbis as final. However, other rabbis may disagree. Orthodox Judaism has a range of opinions on the circumstances and extent to which change is permissible. Haredi Jews generally hold that even minhagim must be retained and existing precedents cannot be reconsidered. Modern Orthodox authorities are generally more inclined to permit limited changes in customs and some reconsideration of precedent. All Orthodox authorities, however, agree that only later rabbinical interpretations are subject to reconsideration, and hold that core sources of divine written and oral law, such as the Torah, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, cannot be overridden. Conservative Judaism. One view held by conservative Judaism is that while God is real, the Torah is not the word of God in a literal sense. However, in this view the Torah is still held as mankind's record of its understanding of God's revelation, and thus still has divine authority. In this view, traditional Jewish law is still seen as binding. Jews who hold to this view generally try to use modern methods of historical study to learn how Jewish law has changed over time, and are in some cases more willing to change Jewish law in the present. A key practical difference between conservative and orthodox approaches is that conservative Judaism holds that its rabbinical body's powers are not limited to reconsidering later precedents based on earlier sources, but the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards is empowered to override biblical and Talmudic prohibitions by takana when perceived to be inconsistent with modern requirements of use of ethics. The CJLS has used this power on a number of occasions, most famously in the driving teshuvah, which says that if someone is unable to walk to any synagogue on the Sabbath, and their commitment to observance is so loose that not attending synagogue may lead them to drop it altogether, the rabbi may give them a dispensation to drive there and back, and more recently in its decision prohibiting the taking of evidence on mamzer status on the grounds that implementing such a status is immoral. The CJLS has also held that the Talmudic concept of kavod habriyo permits lifting rabbinic decrees on grounds of human dignity, and used this principle in a December 2006 opinion lifting all rabbinic prohibitions on homosexual conduct. Conservative Judaism also made a number of changes to the role of women in Judaism, including counting women in the minyan and ordaining women as rabbis. The latter was accomplished by a simple vote on the faculty of the JTS. Orthodox Judaism holds that takanot can only supplement and can never nullify biblical law, and significant decisions must be accompanied by scholarly responses citing sources and halakhic precedent. An example of how different views of the origin of Jewish law inform conservative approaches to interpreting that law involves the CJLS's acceptance of Rabbi Eli Kaplan Spitzer's responsum decreeing the biblical category of mamzer as inoperative, in which the CJLS adopted the responsum's view that of how, in the conservative view of Halakha, the morality which we learn through the unfolding narrative of our tradition informs the application of Mosaic law. We cannot conceive of God sanctioning undeserved suffering. When a law of Torah conflicts with morality, when the law is unpleasant, we are committed to find a way to address the problem. We are willing to do explicitly what was largely implicit in the past, namely, to make changes when needed on moral grounds. It is our desire to strengthen Torah that forces us to recognize explicitly the overriding importance of morality, a morality which we learn from the larger, unfolding narrative of our tradition. The responsum cited several examples of how, in Spitzer's view, the rabbinic sages declined to enforce punishments explicitly mandated by Torah law. The examples include the trial of the accused adulteress, the law of the breaking of the neck of the heifer, and the application of the death penalty for the rebellious child. Spitz argues that the punishment of the mamzer has been effectively inoperative for nearly 2,000 years due to deliberate rabbinic inaction. Further, he suggested that the rabbis have long regarded the punishment declared by the Torah as immoral, and came to the conclusion that no court should agree to hear testimony on mamzer.It. His motion was passed by the CJLS. The decision represented a watershed for conservative Judaism because it represented an explicit abrogation of a biblical injunction on the grounds of contemporary morality, as distinct from exigency. The dissenters, who were included Rabbi Joel Roth as well as a partial concurrence by Rabbi Daniel Nevins, argued for reaffirming the classical halakhic framework in which human decrees inform and often limit but never wholly abrogate law believed to be of divine origin, stating that we should acknowledge that God's law is beyond our authority to eliminate, but should continue the traditional approach of applying strict evidentiary rules and presumptions that tend to render enforcement unlikely. He also argued that the current framework is moral, both because proving mamzer status sufficiently beyond all doubt is already so difficult that it is rare, and because the mere existence and possibility of mamzer.It status, even if rarely enforced, creates an important incentive for divorcing parties to obtain a get to avoid the sin of adultery. He cited a responsum by prominent Haredi Orthodox Rabbi Ovadia Yosef as an example of how the traditional approach works. Rabbi Yosef was faced with the child of a woman who had left a religious marriage without religious divorce and had a child in the second marriage, seemingly an open and shut case of mamzer status. Rabbi Yosef proceeded to systematically discredit the evidence that the former marriage had ever taken place. The ketubah was mysteriously not found and hence disqualified, and the officiating rabbi's testimony was never sufficiently corroborated and hence not credible. Rabbi Yosef then found reason to doubt that the new husband was ever the father, finding that because the ex-husband occasionally delivered alimony personally, an ancient presumption that any time a husband and wife are alone together the law presumes intercourse has taken place governed the case. He held that Jewish law could not disprove, and hence had to conclude, that the original husband really was the child's father and there was no case of mamzer status.